Welcome back to In the Woods. This is episode 5. It's me, Sarah. I'm here with Pastor Pete and a guest.
Commissioner Gordon.
Yes.
Commissioner Gordon.
Commissioner Lane Gordon.
That's a nickname I haven't heard a whole lot.
Ever?
I've heard it. I've heard the old Commissioner Gordon.
Yeah. You were being sarcastic there.
No, it's funny. So when you grow up with first of all, first name and last name can both be either first names or last names. So things can get played around there. And then the name Lane rhymes with all sorts of laying the pain and all that. And then being a teacher, you get nicknames. And then the one that's probably stuck with me the most, because where I teach, my brother also teaches, and we both teach pretty much the same stuff. And so Mr. Gordon, who teaches English, doesn't work, or Mr. Gordon, who teaches theater, doesn't work. So LG is what you'll hear most people call me.
The LG.
LG or KG, because that's my brother. So yeah, I got lots of nicknames, but.
Well, just for clarity, like some people, people still back in San Diego that watch the podcast, Lane is one of our volunteer worship leaders. You were leading yesterday, and I just always love getting different people, different faces, and different conversations. So great having you on the podcast.
Thank you.
Some podcasts have been like very deep into like the guest past and history, and others, where we go, but maybe just a couple minutes for our listeners and people watching. I don't know, just a quick, who are you? Where are you from? You in a nutshell.
Yeah. Did you laugh when you said a couple minutes?
Most
people know that
I'm timing. It's all right.
And go. When I was 5. So lived in Battle Creek for the last almost 25 years. My wife and I have made Battle Creek our home. Grew up pretty much in Michigan. Was born in Rockford, Illinois, but grew up in Michigan.
You were born in Rockford?
Yep.
Did I know that?
I don't know.
Oh, that's like my hometown area.
I didn't know that. Yeah, born in Rockford. My mom was born and raised in Chicago. My brother was born in Crystal Lake, but we moved to Michigan when I was, I think, like 3 or so. So spent my life pretty much in Michigan. Went to Spring Arbor University for both my bachelor's and my master's degree. Actually started out thinking that I wanted to, my original major was radio and TV broadcasting. So
You're the second person on this podcast who went to school for some form of
that's right.
acting or broadcasting. I tell you what.
And then theater speech was my minor. Switched that to education my junior year, and when I graduated in 2000, I applied to only one job because I kind of was like, I was engaged, we were getting married, my wife and I thought, well, I suppose I should probably do that whole job thing. And so I applied to a single job at Lakeview High School in Battle Creek because I saw they had an English teacher opening, and I was the second choice. I always reminded my principal, just remember, you offered it to somebody else first and they turned it down. And he's like, I know, but I'm glad they did. So only job I've had out of college my entire career at Lakeview. And I teach English and theater and public speaking.
Cool.
And have done that for 25 years. This Thanksgiving actually will be 25 years. And then music, like volunteering on the worship team, was here for 12 years and then served at another church for 7. And then we just came back here. One thing about serving at another church and attending another church for us, I was driving into a city that I didn't live in and doing life with people that I didn't necessarily like. I mean, I got to know them after 7 years, but I was, attending church in a community that I wasn't living in and engaging in. And it was the thing that I missed the most. And one of the things that I really felt pretty strongly about coming back here, I guess it was about 2 or 3 years ago, was just that, like serving on a Sunday and then seeing students in my room on a Monday that were there. That just means a lot to me, to serve people on a Sunday who are a part of the community that I'm serving Monday through Friday.
Well, yeah, I think it was a couple episodes ago maybe that a question had come in about people looking for a home church, and I know we kind of briefly hit on it, but I think that's such an interesting thing about, like, you can drive somewhere to find someone that you like the
100%.
music and the preaching, but you miss so much of the heart of what it means to be the church, to be in a relationship with people and people you do life with and people you see at work and things. And
yeah, and I think sometimes probably that and choosing to enter in to service to the church body is that thing that then takes you to that next place of connection, because again, you're greeting or serving or sitting with people that you're doing life with outside of here versus, I attend, but I show up and sit in the back row and leave. And you can do that. We live in a culture where that's actually, I think, a pretty common thing, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But I think it's always, for me, like the drive to serve the church is for that reason.
So one of the things that I was going to say triggered, that's the wrong word. Can't use triggered anymore. One of the things that made me think, like, it'd be fun to be on the podcast. So right now, our director of worship, who, Caden will definitely get on the podcast here one of these days, he's a young man. He's a young man.
He
and
is.
You and I are not. We're Gen
complaining
Xers.
about my elbow pain
we were complaining walking up here about the steps. And
that's where we are.
So yesterday I had made a comment to you. I think it was like, there's a song we were singing yesterday where there's a whole section where it just goes, whoa, whoa.
Yeah.
And I just said, would you just do the Blossom? Whoa. And I realized no one in that room got that reference other than you.
Yep.
Blossom, Sarah, was a show from our childhood. And Joey was a character who went, whoa.
Yeah, that was his tag character line.
And I was like, at least there's somebody here.
I got it, man. I hear you.
So I was thinking, though, because I had this conversation with Caden about a song, and the song was "Open the Eyes of My Heart."
Yeah.
And it was this weird moment, because for those of you that maybe have been a part of church for a while, "Open the Eyes of My Heart" I would classify as an oldie, probably like mid 90s. And it's funny because when you're working with somebody who is young,
who wasn't born.
Right. There's almost a sense of like, I don't know what's old and new and things like that, right?
Yes.
But worship music here's the thing. Worship music has not changed a lot after a massive change.
Yes.
So you got into the 80s and 90s when Vineyard and some of these other groups were just Maranatha, were making huge wholesale changes.
Christian music.
And then you get to like the late 90s, early 2000s when Passion and Hillsong United start playing this different style. It hasn't really changed in 25 years.
Yeah.
So like when we talk about new songs, you guys did a song yesterday from Delirious that's probably 27, 28 years old. Mm-hmm. And I think in Caden's mind, he's like, is this a new one? No, it's not.
Yeah, no.
I'm just curious, like, because you've been leading worship for a while, and now you're in that season of, we're not hip and cool anymore. You still have a lot of tattoos, but we're not hip and cool anymore. Yeah. How have you seen it shift, and what does that look like for you as a worship leader over the last probably 20 years?
Yeah, it is funny that you bring that up. So we have like a song bank that we will look at and pull songs from, and I always chuckle a little bit as what is classified under the hymn section.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, dude, I know 1985 was a long time ago, but I'm like, yeah, that's not a hymn. It's fine, but like, yeah.
Well, Caden thought that the song "How Deep the Father's Love" was a hymn.
Yeah, or "I Exalt Thee," which we sang last week.
Caden, that was written in the 90s. Like, no, it wasn't. That was like the 1800s. No, so I was like, no, Google it.
Yeah, that is. I definitely, there's sort of that, you start to feel that gap a little bit when you're talking about those, and the guys on the team in general. In fact, you were a part of this. I still love you, but they were joking at, and I forget what the song was now, but they were talking about something as like a classic and an oldie. And my response was like, guys, that came out in 2010. I had do you remember this conversation? I was like, I had a 9-year-old. I'd been teaching for a decade. I'm like, that's not and they're like, oh yes, it is. I'm like, it was 15 years ago. That's not that long. But I say that, and then I simultaneously remember the reality of being in my 20s and thinking, man, I'm in my 20s. that's not that. It's not 20 years on this earth is not a gigantic chunk of time, but I get it. Like it's your scope, right? I remember when the school year used to feel as a kid, oh my word. And now I'm like, yeah, I got 2 more years and it's like no big deal. So you definitely start to feel, that gap a little bit. You're right. I think, I mean, stylistically you always have, certain, whether it's rhythms or instruments, a lot of 80s and early 90s stuff felt very synthesized, that kind of created tone and sound. And I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, but you do tend to find that sometimes, I think probably Christian music in general, and even worship music at times, you'll see some blurring of the lines between what starts to become sort of popular in culture in general. So, as you saw sort of the world of, returning back to more acoustic analog type stuff, you kind of see that flow and that pushback. But yeah, I mean, I've got a good scope of years to kind of watch it play out. And it's interesting being, I think I'm probably the second oldest person on the team. Scott, our bass player, has got a few years on me.
You got to keep him there.
But
don't leave, man. I can't be the oldest.
Yeah, but it is funny and mildly interesting just to to serve with a younger group. But I mean I love it. I mean my role as a teacher very much puts me in a place not of like, let me teach you how to do this, but just an attempt to always like speak into and mentor and help and share wisdom of my own experiences. So I like that. But musically, yeah, I think you're right. I think it's interesting how we've, large grand scale worship from large churches and stylistically, there's probably not been maybe a ton of
I was driving in my car. And my daughter is 15 and she's starting to just listen to music a lot, but she loves music from like my age. So everything is like early 2000s, which I mean, I went into her room and I'm like, she had her AirPods in. I'm like, what are you listening to? And it was like Fall Out Boy or something. And I'm like, that's 20 years old. Huh? But we got into the Beatles. And so I'm listening to the Beatles in my car and the song Help came on. And I realized that, just the difference of time is immense. And I started explaining to her, I'm like, if you listen to this song, you can hear, if you listen to the guitars and the sound of the guitars, and then you listen to something the Beatles wrote 10 years later, you'll actually realize a massive change 100%. In music as you introduce new instruments and kinds of things. That happened constantly through the 70s and 80s and 90s. But then you get into the 2000s and the songs that you guys played yesterday that were new sounded just like the songs that were old. Sure. Like nothing has much changed. Yeah. But I was even, when we go through our services, I look at the order and I look at the names of the song, and you did a song called Praise Chorus. It was literally, the name of the song was Praise Chorus. And I thought, are you guys pulling out an old one? Like, no, it's a brand new song. Yeah. Called we're just running out of names. But Sarah, you led that one, and that's like a Bethel song, right?
I think so.
Maybe. I think so. Yeah.
It was a cool song.
Yeah.
You have a very I hope this comes across the right way I want to say it, which is good. Like a kind of like a smokiness to your voice that was just really cool, and that song was great.
Which is interesting because that is a new tone for me.
I like it.
Okay.
Well,
I don't know where it came from because I grew up doing theater, so I've always been up in the vibrato.
I will tell you, serving with her and hearing that song, I chose for you this week particularly because in that range that you were in, and it was probably a month or two ago, but you had a song that was like in your lower register, and she can sit in that like alto tone, and it's kind of husky. And,
it is,
I love it.
Thank you.
And I always say this sort of jokingly, you don't necessarily hear it in my speaking voice.
I chose smoky, not husky.
Yes, that's okay.
You gotta be careful with,
Husky. You don't hear necessarily my speaking voice, but my singing voice, I'm like the alto, like I'll usually find harmonies that are like female alto harmonies, not like I actually kind of struggle in my lower register and find myself. So I like singing with her because we actually can kind of land in the same place.
That's cool.
Probably the men at church though, because most guys want to sing down here, and
Yeah,
I'm
they can
I'm
sing with
usually
me.
I'm running the male part up a little higher, but yeah.
You're also so it's funny when we refer to people who are like really like, you know, intense, we used to call them rockers. Like he's a rocker. You're literally a rocker. Like you go back and forth, left to right on both feet. Like you kind of, if you're listening, you can't see it, but yesterday was fantastic.
I have a hard time standing still in general. But that's one of the running jokes. It's actually the one place that I've been sort of admonished in my role is to ask me to not move so much.
Stand still.
I think Thane one time said that LG was going full Mario Kart on stage, and I was like, dude, I know, and it's not like there's never that intentionality, but there is. And I one of the first things you and I, Pete, when we were talking, I just had said to you, like, there is something so deeply rooted in me musically, like as a prayer language and as a place of like expression to the Lord. I cannot sit still or stand still and if you were to like literally in a non-creepy way sneak into my house and watch me in my workshop working or in my like I think you would see that. For me, that's just an expression of worship movement. And so I certainly don't try to annoy the lighting guys and the sound guys and all that. I'm looking over in Mo's direction.
Actually, Morgan is very expressive in his worship too. If you look back in the sound booth, Morgan's often dancing. Yeah. He's jumping around. He's raising his hands.
Yeah, baby.
He can't sit still either.
Yes.
It's just Morgan. He's an expressive person.
But I'll take rocker. I'll take that.
Yeah. It works both ways. Yeah. Well, hey, let's get in a little bit. We talked about, we were still in Colossians 3 this week. It was the fifth week of our series studying the book together, and looked at last week. We were looking at Paul's sort of, here's the old life that you're dying to, and then he sort of switches to here's explanations of the new life.
Yep.
We kind of connected that to peace, and Sarah, somebody submitted a question that was kind of interesting about like asking through some things that when you read it, it was like, that's actually a good question because it leads to some things I didn't get to.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It says, Pastor Pete referred to being a peacemaker on Sunday. Can you contrast the role of peacemaker, peacekeeper, and enabler as they may relate to the modern church? Such a good question.
Well, and I'm glad that question came in because one of the things that I always want this space to be available for is to have opportunities to talk through things I couldn't talk through. And one of I've said this a lot when we used to do this at my last church. It was a common phrase or idea was, you know, sometimes you can sit in the auditorium and listen to someone preach like, this is so long. And a lot of times it is long, I get it. But if you think about it, like, there's no way that you can get on a stage and say everything you need to say about a subject. You just can't. So modern, quote unquote, modern churches over the last 30 years have developed the whole concept of a series where it's like, hey, let's take an idea and break it up over weeks. Yeah. Because usually you just can't, like, but even then, even in one Sunday, if you give me 12 verses, I can't say everything needs to be said about those 12 verses. So you're constantly picking and choosing. And this week was actually like, maybe last week it wasn't, like this week was hard for me because I thought about just not even getting into half that passage because there was so much that I was like, how do I even unpack all that? But the thing about peacekeeping or peacemakers and enablers is when I was sitting and writing my message, I went in a completely different direction, like halfway in because of that question. And I was like, I need to talk about this, I need to address this, I need to address this. And then by the time I started getting closer, I'm like, I have to cut all of that. And the stuff that I cut that I thought this is probably just another message someday was when you're talking about the idea of being a peacemaker. And yesterday especially, I mean, I even got into the idea of slavery and looking at the idea of, so Jesus is saying, even when people are being the worst possible to you, you have a choice of how to respond. And that Jesus calls us to respond the way that he did at the cross. What was difficult about that though, and I didn't have time for it, and we can dialogue a little bit here, is I tried to briefly, especially I think in the second service, at least make a comment about this doesn't mean Paul is calling Christians to be enablers who just let people walk all over
100%.
them, nor does it mean that there aren't times and specifically roles in our society that Paul himself will say in Romans, God has selected, or you might use a big word like ordained. He said, this is your job, like peacekeeping. I would say that scripturally, the Bible does not call us to be peacekeepers. In Romans 13, Paul says, like, the government has essentially been given the sword to handle retribution and vengeance. If we become peacekeepers, we just turn into the Hatfields and McCoys. You know that reference of just killing each other and killing. Like, the government is called to be a neutral peacekeeping force. So police officers, military, things like that, God has given them the sword, quote unquote, to say it's their responsibility to dispassionately, outside of your anger and rage, to handle justice. You're called to forgive and love and let them handle it. But then there's still this question of like, well, where is the line between forgiving people and living a life that shows kindness and responds in love, even when people hurt you, and just being an enabler and letting people continue to hurt you over 100%. And over. And I looked at that on my paper and I'm like, this would be an entire Sunday morning message. I can't get into it. But I guess maybe like open up the door for you guys to comment on thoughts from it. Like, how would you respond to that question?
Yeah, I think you have to sometimes compartmentalize where those different places could show up. And what I mean by that is, you got into, as you worked your way. By the way, when you had mentioned too, of course, the challenge to exegete scripture line by line is you're going to come up to that verse where you're like, oh, dang.
I need a day for this one.
I don't know if I want to go. I don't know if I want to like go through that. But if you're going, if you're working your way kind of line by line, you just have to, you have to work your way through it. I thought you did a nice job. But I mentioned that because again, like you may talk about peacekeeping or enabling, or what was the third?
It's peacemaker,
peacekeeper, or enabler. The way that might look functionally in a marriage versus, and I think this question was like in the church body as a whole, what that looks like. I guess I would always start by saying, for me, resting in the question of what am I being asked in any given scenario to submit to, as a person who attends this church and who has poured time and energy into it, I'm called to submit to the authority of the church, right? And I'm asked to sort of step under your leadership, the leadership of those who are elders over me. And so understanding that that's something that's asked of me, and then not asking me to like turn my brain off, but maybe where I may see places of concern or questions or whatever, in an attempt to be peaceable and to maintain that love and respect, but to not be afraid to ask questions about those things, to push back in some areas, to ask for you to spend some time talking through X, Y, and Z. And I think that might be in an attempt to, you could say, make peace or maintain peace, right? If things are functioning well, to have that place of open dialogue. I guess I would think, or maybe keep peace in that way. To make peace, I guess, would make me think that there's disunity that's happening structurally, whether that's in a church, in a marriage, or whatever. And so, who's stepping in to try to, talk through the problem, and I think there's a place for that probably sometimes. The enabler would be my greatest fear in any case, to sit in,
allowing people to
sit in silence, or to give strength and power to someone or something that's clearly not functioning in a godly way. And I think, like, again, to come back to that word of submission, because that was one of the verses that you had to work your way through, as you think through Scripture in general, we're called in different ways to submit to all sorts of things, and that only starts to feel sticky because we live in a broken world where that feels like a submission to power that could then exploit. And of course we don't, when we're in glory, things will be perfected. But in the world that we live in brokenness, there's times where that's going to be a reality, but in a godly way, to just enter again underneath the instruction of and protection of those who God has placed over us. There's an ordering to those things. I don't, I've known you for a month and a half, but you're in a position, and this is a weight that's on your shoulders where I'm stepping in under your authority and submitting to you as one of the leaders of our church. And I'm asked to do that. And I think, when we had dinner together the first time, one of the things I said to you was, and I just want you to know that I'm for you in all places, and I'm a defender for you in all places, unless you enter into places that are ungodly and I can't support you in that. That would be the place where it's like, well then those roles maybe shift a little bit.
Yeah. The idea of submission, that's a whole thing to unlock in itself. Moving past the very specific and addressed in this passage issue of like wives and husbands, and looking at it from a greater scale. Again, Paul uses that language when he's talking about the government, submitting to governing authorities. 100%. And his point is not let people abuse you or let governments be corrupt. His point is, if you could sort of categorize it as, in a perfect world, things functioning as they are, you're submitted to people who have the responsibility to handle things. And so whether it's in the church world where God has said, hey, Pete and your team, you're here. So if you are in a verbal war with somebody or feeling like somebody's wronging you in the church, instead of egging their house or keying their car or talking bad about them, you can come to the people that are the governing authorities in that way and say, hey, can you help deal with this? Can I turn this over to you so it doesn't become this war of my heart turning bitter and angry? And then the same can, beyond that, on a larger scale, is like, well, okay, I'm going to call the police in this issue. Like, and I think this is important. It's almost like we can say this out loud and talk about it. It's possible for me to love and forgive someone who has harmed or abused me, but still get the police involved and send them to prison.
1,000%.
Yeah. So like the idea that I'm supposed to love people and be a peacemaker doesn't mean that other people aren't still accountable for their actions and should be held accountable, and that you have a right to safety. So in the church world, one of the worst things that we have done throughout the years, and it's coming to light a lot, is we have taught forgiveness and submission and love in a way that has allowed abuse to just be buried and not addressed. Well, my husband's abusing me, and it's like, well, I have to be submissive and I have to forgive him. It's like, well, hold on, like that, we're misunderstanding concepts here. Submission works in a way where two healthy people are appropriately dealing with each other. When one person breaks that contract and starts being abusive in a physical or other way, like you actually, like Paul said, even in slavery, even in the worst situations, you can still choose in your heart how you're going to verbally respond, emotionally respond, like what kind of person you're going to be, how you're going to talk. But that's not the same thing as, I need myself and my children to be safe, and I'm going to call the police, and I'm going to get people involved in the situation. Those are separate issues that should be kept separate. And when the church confuses them too much, we actually create huge problems, and we actually cover up and allow abuse to continue. And that's not what I was saying yesterday. And even what I did say in the second service a little bit was, I spent a little more time on it, like we kind of did that even with slavery in America over the past 400 years of like, well, the Bible says, so just keep doing it. It's like, well, it says slaves obey your masters. Like, no, hold on. He's actually speaking to how they have a choice to respond in love, even though they're being abused. He's not telling you can keep abusing them. You completely misinterpreted that. And so like the ability to step in and say, oh no, we need to talk about justice here. And we need people who can dispassionately, bring about justice. And that might be, we're involved in that, but then it's also, how am I going to respond as a person? Like those are separate issues for Paul.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a really important point when you talked about what that does for the heart of the person, again, under that authority that may be in really awful circumstances, and in really real ways, ultimately being asked, to forgive, to let go of those things. And you mentioned, someone who's lived through abuse or lived through whatever. It's never an allowance for what's happened, but we also know what holding on to pain and hurt. And again, it's not about forgetting what happened, and it's not about just, in a broken world, you've got to recognize that there's going to be that collateral damage, but the understanding that literally those are the things that Christ put to death on the cross so that they wouldn't have to be your identity, right? Your new identity in Christ is a freedom from all of those things that have happened to anyone in any of those situations. Again, whether it's a marriage, whether it's church hurt, there's so many examples of people under authority where authority has misused that placement. But the thing that I love about the Lord, and it's also kind of scary, is he is the ultimate, he's going to enact justice in his way, and so no one escapes that, right? So to the person in those circumstances who's being asked, like, just be careful to not let your heart be so bitter, even towards the people that are enslaving you, are abusing you. Don't give permission to that stuff in your mind and normalize that, but be careful that you don't allow that to literally also be something that's wounding and tearing you down, because those things will literally, eat you inside. And to know that there is freedom in that. And like you said, whether in this world or when you stand before, the Lord someday, there is a place for God to kind of work out justice in those places. And I would say one more thing as another, and we also live in a very small scope of where we see justice getting played out. But again, for a Lord who's outside of the bounds of time, like, he doesn't miss any of that stuff. And so, there's that little window that maybe we experience, or maybe it's a long window, what feels like a long window of that experience of hurt or harm or whatever. But I just kind of rest in those two things. Number one, that the Lord is ultimately gonna make all of those things right. And sometimes making it right means enacting justice on those who have done wrong. And I was going to say one more thing, because you mentioned this also in the governmental aspect. I mean, if we were to say, again, the place where our modern culture really struggles with submission, it's remembering that even what we might classify as like a bad or ungodly government is not something that surprised the Lord, right? Like, I didn't know that guy was going to win. Like, submission to a role and a position, for me to say, well, I respect that role as a head pastor, or as a president, or as an administrator in this place, not because that person's nailing it, but because that's a role that deserves a bit of my respect. And then again, just living with a real sense of awareness of where I might see, things being misused, power being misused. Again, I think it can be both of those things, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked your clarification about the intensity of slavery at the time, because that I consistently, at least for me, has been something that's been taught. Slavery has been super watered down biblically. Like, well, it was more indentured servitude or whatever it may be, which I think is important, because when it comes to peacemaking, peacekeeping, peace in general, I think sometimes we can lean into the removal of the tension being where the peace is at, So,
like, saying it's not so bad makes it easier, kind of thing.
Yeah. So like whenever that's been taught, it's like, well, it wasn't the same, therefore that choice was simpler. So I think making that clarification has really brought some grit to the passage. That was big for me, to hear that, because like, peace is not the removal of the problem, the tension, the person, the government, all of that. And it makes the choice of peace so much more gritty, weighty, and real, I think, than to just water it down.
Well, and I think to bring light, because you did hit on a good point, and I think it can be both of those things. It is culturally something that was just a very prevalent reality.
It's their life.
And lived in, the evil of a Roman Empire where everyone underneath them was in oppression, but even those in oppression played that kind of traditional, cultural reality of bondservants and all of those things. Like that stuff was kind of, it was yes and like all of those things, right?
Sure.
And then of course we make that connection of like, for us, that reality is a history of a transatlantic slave trade.
And it was primarily racial, which is very different.
Yes.
Yeah. That's the key difference between the American system of slavery. At no point in human history had the idea of slavery ever been connected to ethnicity.
Yep.
Slavery was connected to poverty, first and foremost. You'd sell yourself into slavery or kids into slavery. Or like criminals could be sold into slavery. You'd forego your right to freedom. And then the most common slave in the ancient world, especially in the Roman Empire, was simply a prisoner of war. Yeah. So instead of killing all the prisoners, they would enslave them. Yeah. So when you'd go to war and you would defeat your enemy, the quote unquote spoils of war would be you'd loot their homes and you'd take their women and you'd take all the men as slaves. Yeah. Had nothing, you could literally look the same and talk the same, and you often did. It wasn't until really specifically America, I don't even say the Americas, like the USA, where you really had this like growing thing into the Western Europeans didn't enslave indigenous black colored skinned people because their skin was black. They enslaved them because they were easy targets. Yeah. And they were just wicked people and just did that. When it got to America, though, you then developed this whole new set of evil of just like, I'm going to hate you because your skin is darker. You deserve to be slave. You had Christians using texts in Genesis to defend it because, you're a descendant of this, shut up. Yeah. But we did it. And we had pastors who would, like white slave owners would bring in white preachers to stand on a literal soapbox in front of all their slaves and teach Colossians 3 and 4 to their slaves. Yeah. The Bible tells you to submit to masters. They wouldn't read the rest of the passage. Sure. They'd completely ignore them. Paul would turn around and talk to the masters. But it was that aspect of it was different. But the life of a slave, I mean, I've, for the record, this was a whole part of study in my doctoral work. So I'm pretty read a lot of books on this.
You've done a few minutes on this topic.
Yes. If you were a slave in the Roman Empire, and even these words like indentured servitude or bondservant are actually different things. So an indentured servant is somebody who has their freedom, but has essentially agreed to work for you to pay off a debt. Yeah. What you could do to that person was different than if they bought you as a slave. Yeah. So in these words like diakonos, a servant in Greek, was different than a doulos, which was the word slave. Mm. So sometimes even in the New Testament, Jesus will talk about being a servant and he'll say diakonos, and that's more the idea of like, you could almost take diakonos and think to yourself of like going to work in my relationship with my boss. Yeah. When he used the word doulos, though, that was not the situation. Sure. It wasn't like going to work. Yep. It was being owned and abused. And so what's weird about the Bible now, so if you read your English Bible, there are many times that the English translators choose to translate doulos as servant, when actually it should be slave, simply because of the difficult race relations of our country. Yeah. And I'm actually okay with that. The last thing you want to do is, allow old wounds to cause problems. But if you dig into the original language, you see that Jesus used the word slave all the time because people all around him were in slavery.
Understood it. Yeah.
And they were drawn to his message of blessed are those who are persecuted, blessed are the poor and the weak and the meek. So if you're in slavery and you don't have any hope, the message of Jesus was a shining light. So Paul was talking to a lot of slaves. Yeah. But their life was horrible. You could, if somebody owns you, like they could kill you and there was no repercussions.
Yep.
There was no government. If you were a Roman citizen and you killed a Roman citizen, you'd have to go to court. But you could kill a slave. There's a whole, I read an entire treatise on the guide on how to get, like essentially it translates as how to keep your slaves working. And this is from probably maybe 50 or 60 years before Jesus was alive, where it talks about, carrot and stick, you can beat your slave or not. And like one of the most powerful tools they had was if I own you and you have a child, I own your child. And at any point I can sell your child. And you can have romantic feelings from the person, but you can't get married. Like if you're my property, I choose whether you get married. So one of the core pieces of abuse for ancient slavery was holding your family hostage.
Sure.
And so when Paul says slaves obey your masters, a lot of slaves were like, I do, just because if I don't, they're going to sell my children and take my wife or my husband away from me. And just a horrible existence. And there were some slaves that actually had good, if you were a slave in Caesar's court, you lived very well. You dressed well. So there are times that Paul even talks about being a slave of Christ, having great riches and things. A lot of that going on in the New Testament. Sure. But yeah, I'm always bothered when I hear people say, oh, ancient slavery wasn't that bad. It was terrible. It was regular beatings. It was living in a hovel. It was probably not much food. And it was constant fear. And Paul speaks into that. Yeah.
And adding to that, again, sometimes our timeline being very tunnel visioned, the world was a world of conquest for tens of thousands of years of recorded history. It's only within the last 150-ish years.
Now, see, Elaine, saying tens of thousands of years of human history is going to get some people upset on this podcast.
Recorded human history. I'll stand on that. But like, again, understanding, like to say, well, it wasn't that bad back then. No, life was difficult in general because it was a world of conquest, and it was only a matter of time before someone came in and took over what you had or who was ruling, and now you were being sold to this group or conquered by this group or whatever. Sure. It was just a world of conquest. And so we have this, like, I think it was C.S. Lewis, the chronological snobbery. Have you ever heard that phrase before? I feel like that was a C.S. Lewis line. I could be wrong, but
you look back in time and judge them differently.
Yeah, as in a it's just like, dude, you our understanding, our scope of understanding is so limited, and it's not necessarily our fault, but it's the comfort and ease in which we live in today, which is just literally different from what the entire course of human history has been. And that's only shifted in the last, would you say 100, 150 years where conquest and where that's just not what we do anymore.
I think this might be even a good way to kind of bring this conversation home. Like, I ended yesterday here at Battle Creek talking about the idea of overflowing and how when we're rooted in Christ and He is our example and we're walking in Him, something different comes out of us. I think what is the hardest thing for people like Gen Xers and Boomers especially, who occasionally see young people on Instagram or TikTok talking about how terrible America is and stuff. And we're all like, it's like you just wish they would have some perspective. And especially when people come at Christianity, like, oh, Christianity is wicked and evil. It's like, if you would just take just 10 minutes to read a history book, what you'll find is everything you consider good in the world and everything that you don't like about the world and want to see change, you think that way because you've been influenced by Jesus. Mm-hmm. Even if you don't believe in Jesus, you have been influenced by Jesus. When people stand up and say, oh, we have this terrible history of race relationships in our country, it's wicked, it's vile. It's like, oh, it is. Yes, absolutely.
The church helped put that to death.
Why do you think it's wicked and vile? Do you think anyone 1,000, 2,000 years ago thought it was wicked and vile? No. You think it's wicked and vile because you've grown up in a culture that has taught you there's a better world. Yeah. And you're comparing it to a better world. What is the better world? It's the picture that Jesus painted. Yeah. So the idea that slavery is wrong isn't intuitive. It's not. We think, oh, of course slavery is wrong. Well, why do you think that? You were raised in a society and a culture that looked to Jesus and saw a different way of living, that for tens of thousands of years of recorded human history Nobody did.
Yeah.
It's absolutely normal and perfectly acceptable if I defeat you in battle to now own you. Yeah. And in some ways, they would even, this would be a whole other
Come
thing.
on.
I might do this someday. If you study the way they interpreted the will of the gods, this goes back to creation. I don't know. 2 minutes.
Go.
20 minutes. Okay. So in Genesis, God takes nothing and creates something good and then rests. That was a revolutionary creation story that people back then had no concept for. All of their creation stories, all of them, we have tons of them, across different, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Babylonian. What you see in ancient creation stories is the world is in chaos. Everything is broken and fighting and dysfunctional. The gods come in and like rein it in, like throwing a lasso around it and tightening a whole, And so your job is to help the gods keep it reined in so the chaos doesn't break out. So in a sense, what you're saying is the world is fundamentally broken and evil, and we're just doing the best we can to keep it as is. And so humans are essentially slaves. So there's the Enuma Elish is a creation story that talks about how the lower gods were complaining about we don't like doing all this hard work. We need to create mankind to bear the drudgery of the gods. Like humans in general are created to be slaves. Yeah. And so the powers that represent the gods, the images of the gods, the kings, it can enslave other people because they're helping the gods keep chaos at bay. But then you read Genesis and it's like, no, there was never any chaos. Like there was never chaos. There's when it was created, it was
intention,
good. The chaos, we created the chaos. And then we created gods pretending to hold it. The real God is like, no, you're just breaking what was always good. Yep. I rested when I was done. Yep. And now you don't have any rest because you're not listening to me and following me. You've created slavery in your own minds to deal with the chaos. And so the Babylonians believed that their great god Marduk wanted them to bring the whole world into conquest and make everybody in the world part of Babylon, and that was going to reign in the chaos. So one of the most misunderstood and difficult passages, I think, in the Old Testament is the Tower of Babel. Like, why does one language, the idea of making them all speak the same language was power, it was control, it was domination. Like they were trying to bring the whole world under one banner, speak the same language, and they did it through power and might. And God's like, no, we're not doing that. Yeah. I'm actually okay with different languages and different cultures and independence because the world was always at peace that way. So Genesis is just so counterculture and revolutionary. And it was too much. Sorry. That's going to be a whole other podcast.
Come on.
I love that stuff. But I don't even know where this podcast went. Anyway, Sarah, why do you keep taking us off on these tangents? But yeah, Lane, really appreciate having you on.
That was fun.
This was fun. Sorry to go all historic.
No. Listen, I have all sorts of thoughts about all sorts of things. So I'm always the guy to chew on those things. So it's good. I think more than anything to kind of land the plane on it. I think what you hear all three of us saying is you have to always think and read and process. Yes, contextually. What was the world like then? What's the world like now? But again, as believers who are ultimately called first to submit to Christ, to just remember that under his authority, like he gets the last word in all things. And if he's good and worthy of our praise, then I can rest in that. Again, it doesn't mean that I just allow whatever evil's happening everywhere. No, I enter into that for the sake of bringing the gospel to the world. But man, I can just sleep well at night knowing that the Lord is good in spite of really awful circumstances and a world that continues to be broken, we oftentimes, this is one of the things I teach about in my actual classes, we often talk about slavery as something that was, and we're missing that the new definition of slavery not only exists today, but statistically you can find numbers that will say that there's actually more people enslaved today than there were throughout periods of time. We as believers have to enter into that brokenness and not talk about it as I can't believe back then people used to do that. It's happening right now. Yeah. And where, for the sake of the cross, are we entering to the fringes of brokenness and trying to do something about it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good place to land. We talk so much of this conversation can become personal. Well, should I let this happen to me? How should I respond? And the message of Jesus was like, oh, I'm actually calling you to go make a difference in the world.
Yeah.
I'm actually calling you to go and do something about evil and injustice.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I don't know, it's a weird balance we live in, but it's an important one to keep talking
For
about.
sure.
So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah.
Great having you,
Cool.
Sarah, as always. Next week we have kind of a special conversation, and make sure you tune in next week for our podcast, and it's going to be really good as we end our series on Colossians and just talk about some other important things going on here at Woodland Church. But yeah, looking forward to what God's going to do, and really appreciate both of you. And the music here is just great. It's just great. I appreciate you guys and really enjoy it. So with that, any final words there? Any final words of wisdom?
We always just love hearing your questions.
Yes.
So think on it, submit it, and we love talking about it. We love hearing from you. We love knowing what's on your mind. We love knowing what you're processing and bringing it to the table and sharing it with other people. What you're processing, other people are probably processing as well. So submit those questions. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Have a great week. We'll see you next week on In the Woods podcast. Thanks, guys.
Peace out.
Bye.
No, peace continue.
Peace continue.
Peace
Not peace
made.
out.